Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 291 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Our insightful guest today is Sian Clare, who has a graduate diploma in counselling from York St John University, a BA in Educational and Community Studies, an advanced certificate in clinical supervision, including online and telephone working, a certificate in trauma-informed practice, and a certificate in online and telephone counselling. Sian is also an accomplished child therapist who specialises in working with neurodivergent children, a topic which she will speak about in today's interview. So with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Rory and I welcome you with a big smile to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. As Rory said, it's episode 291. We're sure racking up those podcast numbers, Rory. And in today's episode, 3 stops, starting off with that ethical, sustainable practice, where today we're going to speak about supervision. And more specifically, when is it time to change your supervisor? Or perhaps get a second supervisor alongside your existing supervisor. So all things supervision in ethical, sustainable practice. We then move into practice matters. And of course, that's the lecture with Sian that Rory has spoken about, counselling neurodivergent children. And then we end episode 291 with our student services, where we're going to be diving into the use of AI during your counselling studies, and specifically around transcription. Maybe you're thinking of transcribing your skills session and using an online tool, where we're going to look about the ethics and what we need to know about doing that. But starting us off, Rory, that ethical, sustainable practice, changing supervisors. Should one have a need to change a supervisor? He says in shock and awe.
Well, there we go. There's the shock and awe taken care of, Ken. Well, it's quite interesting. And regular listeners, of course, to the podcast will know that I sometimes refer to my 2 decades of being a therapist. And certainly when I started, we were a cottage industry, and we were, as my tutor very, very wisely observed, an emerging profession. And now, 20 years on, we are a developing profession. When I was first starting out, I couldn't have dreamed about the changes that our profession has seen. And when I'm talking about changes, I'm talking about a better understanding of trauma and ways of supporting clients with trauma. I'm speaking about diversity in its many forms, and how we need to understand and work with diverse cultures and diverse groups. And I think also the fact that there are now many different modalities. There's certainly a number of modalities that have developed over the last few years. So when it comes to thinking about our supervision, most of us start thinking about supervision sat in a classroom when we start with our initial practices as students. But as we develop, we may gain specialities. We may work with diverse groups that need a different form of supervision. So the question we should have always in our mind is, does my supervisor fit with the practice I have now? And it's not a personal thing. Supervision may feel a personal relationship. Certainly I have a very close relationship with my supervisor. But I think as a practitioner, in the front of your mind, it should be, does this supervision match or map my needs at the moment as a practitioner, Ken?
I like that. And of course, that is... You speak about that. We've spoken about this topic before, and we have, and you mentioned the student journey, and we do recommend that if you're a student, when you graduate, you will have had supervision during your placement time to recheck in. Is this still the right supervisor for me? And it may well be that it is, and certainly in my case, it most certainly was. It was a great fit for me. But I think that what we want to avoid here, and why we're bringing this topic up, is we want to avoid falling into a rut where supervision is just supervision, and my supervisor is just my supervisor, and it's never questioned and it's never thought about. And raising this topic, is your supervisor the best fit for where you are right now? And Rory, you'll know within Counselling Tutor, we often use the saying, what got us here may not get us there, and we can be very grateful for the road we've traveled and what got us here. But sometimes as we grow and as we move on, as we learn more things, as we adopt additional skills, we might have a need for something a little bit more. And I'm going to use an example. If you train to be an online and telephone practitioner, so you go and you do a certificate in online and telephone working, on top of your counselling qualification, you are now able to work online and via telephone with clients. Well, if you look to any ethical body, they would suggest that your supervisor should be trained within the modalities in which you work. And if you're working online and you're working with a supervisor who maybe doesn't have that online training, then there's the question, what do I do now? And in the lead to this, Rory, I suggested sometimes we consider changing our supervisor for whatever reason that may be. Other times we might bring on a supervisor for a certain portion or part of our practice.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I supervise a colleague who is predominantly EMDR therapist. I think I've got that right. Eye movement to desensitization and reprogramming therapist. She has her own supervisor for that. She's supervised for that, but she comes to me for consultation, supervision, and it works very well for her. She tells me it works very well. She gets the expertise of the EMDR therapist, and also she then can look at different aspects of a practice with a different supervisor. So I think that's also important, and I think you've hit on a really important point here. Our practice has changed dramatically, certainly since the pandemic. When we're talking about working online, we're not just talking about Zoom therapy with maybe someone in a different part of the country. I'm talking about the UK here because we're based in the UK. We may be working with someone in a different country, and you've got to navigate data protection. You've got to navigate confidentiality. You've got to navigate safety, because there are some countries that may not be safe for someone to be speaking certainly about their sexuality. There's 19 countries in the world where being gay is illegal, and 3. And I don't want to frighten people, where being gay can bring the death penalty. Yeah. So you need to really be thoughtful about how you're working, and having a supervisor who's got specific skill sets in specific areas, I think is absolutely essential, Ken.
Yeah, and looking over this, the topic is changing supervisors, navigating the when and why. So we'll stick with the why at the moment. We've covered a few of those. And another why may be that you're not being challenged, or you're not seeing growth within yourself and within your practice. Because if we think about what supervision is for, a supervision is a peer who is further down the road than you would be, that is there watching over your practice and, of course, in service of your clients at the end of the day. But a good supervisor will challenge you to grow within your own practice. This is kind of the longer that you're in practice and the more you're out there, you become more matured and more seasoned in how you operate and work. And you would expect different things from a supervisor at different parts within that journey. So, for example, if you were in placement and you were a student, you might expect from your supervisor that they would check in with you about ethics, the ethical framework. They may be weaving in the modality that you're learning as your core modality and asking you how you see that kind of playing out within your sessions with your clients. So they would be holding you along that journey. As you become a more mature practitioner, you would expect a more mature, interaction. You'd be looking at different things. You may spend a supervision session on one topic, just one topic, really deep diving on that. So if we're looking at the why, we look to, are we working within a modality that suits with our supervisor at the moment? Have we done any additional training that maybe our supervisor cannot supervise us within that area? It might be children and young people. It might be online working. And then, of course, we would ask, am I being fulfilled in my practice? Am I growing within my practice? Am I getting what I need? Am I being challenged to grow, Rory?
Yeah, so absolutely, because, the work of a therapist is one of growth. We develop through the years, and part of that develop is the kind of soil of CPD and the nutrients and watering of our supervisors to help us flourish. I'm kind of painted a bit of a agricultural picture there, but it's true. And if you're working and you're just getting the same old thing, the same old responses, it becomes stale, and we dare not become stale in our practices. Being challenged is, I think, I can speak for myself, is where the growth is. It's when somebody says, I hear what you're saying, but have you ever thought of this? Or what would happen if you did that? Or are you sure you want to go down that path? Which brings me on to probably another reason why you change your supervisor. Are they matching your ethics? Are they matching your the way that you work? Part of being a supervisor is to hold the ethical framework that you practice under, and share that and work within that framework with your supervisee. And if those ethics are becoming a little bit blurred, or the values that your supervisor is holding are not your values, then that really is a time, I think, to move on, Ken.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of say, we're not suggesting that we all now go and play musical supervisors and change our supervisors. This is just a topic that we're covering, the when and why somebody may change a supervisor. And I think that a really good supervisor who is there for you and your practice and there for you and your clients might mention themselves that it may be time to move on from them to another supervisor. So we're talking about the when now. How do you know when it's the right time? Well, a good supervisor may say, you know what, I think you may, with that extra learning you've done and with that CPD, you're going to be seeing a new client group. I don't feel that I can best support you in that client group. I wonder how you might navigate that, and I wonder what that looks like within our relationship. Because, of course, a supervision relationship does mirror a counselling relationship in that it does have a beginning and it does have a middle and it's going to have an end at some stage. And as counsellors, we want to, I guess, we want to be there for the client only as long as it is necessary. And we couldn't be happier when a client moves on and goes on their own, And it's the same for supervisors. So it's not a difficult, it should not be, I should put in there, a difficult conversation. It should be a mutually joyous thing moving on from a supervisor if it's for the right conditions. Of course, you may have a run-in with a supervisor where you go, I can't work with that person anymore. And like you said, Rory, where it might be a values mismatch or something like that. But I'm saying in the day-to-day running of a practice, it may just be a mutually agreed time, and a good supervisor might bring that up. And I certainly have when I was supervising with some of my supervisees, and my supervisor brought that up for me as well. The very supervisor that I went into when I started my placement, there was the day when we sat and she brought up that topic. And I was still with her for a while after that, but that seed had been planted and it gave me some time to kind of think broader than, oh, okay, this is my supervisor, but there are other options for my practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly said to supervisees, I think probably you need something else. I've had a number of supervisees who have trained to become couples counsellors. I'm not couples trained. It's not an area of practice that holds interest for me, if I'm honest. So they've taken on a couples counsellor supervisor, and they've had 2 lots of supervision. I found myself saying, you're paying for supervision with me, and you're paying for supervision with a couples counsellor. Have you ever thought that maybe you want to roll it into one? And they thought, can I do that? Of course you can. Of course you can. And we've parted our ways with best wishes, and they've gone on to develop a specialism in practice. And also, I've certainly spoken to prospective supervisees who are training in maybe transactional analysis, where you need a specialist approved supervisor. Certainly on some of the courses, you have to be approved, I think, by the UKCP, so which is an ethical body here in the UK that oversees a kind of psychodynamic or psychoanalytical therapists. So again, it's horses for courses. I can't supervise that kind of supervisee who's going on that course. Well, that's fine. Wish you well. Find yourself someone who'll fit and develop your practice in the service of your clients.
I like it. I think it's a great topic. I've got a question around it. It's a kind of a grey area for me, Rory, and we can maybe just kind of end this topic by discussing that. And it's along the lines of a student going into placement will get a supervisor and going to be asked to get a supervisor in their core modality and to work purely in that core modality. And that makes a lot of sense. Past graduation, Rory, maybe maturing in practice, and you've been in practice a few years. What's your thoughts on bringing on a supervisor who maybe has a very good understanding of your core modality in which you trained, but maybe also practices in a different modality? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's a very good topic. I think that having supervised a lot of students right through into professional life, I think as a supervisor, you can start to introduce other ideas into supervision when someone's working as a student. And the reason I say that is that you have to give students, novice therapists, an idea of when they're working beyond their capability. That's one of the things that is implicit when you're working with a student, because you have a 3-way contract. You have a contract with the training provider, certainly here in the UK, and you have a contract with the placement. And although you're working, you're in that what we call formative element of supervision, which is a teaching element. How you're applying that, and you're kind of assessing how the student is applying the core theory within their practice. There are sometimes, I've got to be honest, when you might say, well, look, there's another theory here that might fit better, and have a think about that. The idea is, yes, on the whole, supervising, say, a person-centered therapist, a student should really stick with the modality. But I do think that a lot of supervisors, and I include myself in that, may very well just introduce gently other ideas, and so that there's a transition point when that person becomes qualified. They can then think about where they want to specialize. I think if you just stick too deeply to one modality, when they become qualified, they've got no touchstones to be able to go, maybe that's the direction I want to go professionally, or maybe I want to do more about trauma, maybe I want to do a little bit more in terms of child and adolescent therapy, maybe I want to do some CBT. So I think a wise supervisor will certainly in first training, student trainings, will stick to the modality, but also be aware of helping the student just gain a sense of what else is out there.
I like it, Rory. I think that this kind of springs off into many other topics that we could speak about around this. But for today, that is our ethical, sustainable practice, where Rory and I discussed that question, changing supervision, navigating the when and why. And we move on now from ethical, sustainable practice into practice matters. This is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where we bring in the experts in various areas to come and speak about what it's like for them. And Rory, you met up with Sian to speak about counselling neurodivergent children.
Yes, absolutely. And before we move off that subject, don't forget I've created a super duper handout on 5 reasons to change your supervisor. And to get that, you just go to our mother website, counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 291 in the podcast tab. You'll be able to download that handout, and it's there for you. But yes, I met up with Sian Clare, who is she wouldn't use this term, but I'm going to use it, specialist, I think, in working with neurodiverse children. It's a growing edge, certainly in child therapy, and it was a pleasure to interview her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Neurodiversity is something that we're becoming more and more aware of. The neurodiverse community is becoming more visible, not only in society, but also in our therapy rooms. And those who are engaging in therapy who are neurodiverse may need a different approach and different considerations from a therapist, especially if they are children. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Sian Clare. She's a therapist, she's a supervisor, and she's also a child counsellor whose specialism is neurodivergence and working with neurodivergent children. So, Sian, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Thank you very much, Rory. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. As you know, this is a passion for me. It's something that I've been talking about for a while now, and I really want to throw the light open on this subject and to try and get people to understand so we can best support our clients. So yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I know when we've talked, you've talked about, first of all, the seeming rise of neurodivergent children that you're seeing, and also the accommodation, in other words, adapting your way of working for neurodiverse children. So let's start with that first topic, because I think that's going to affect most therapists who work with children. What do you see as the increase in neurodivergent children appearing at your therapy door, if you like?
Well, that's really interesting, because when I first did my training, I knew a little bit about autism in particular because I'd worked in SEN before, but I started to realise the staggering number of young people that were coming. I'm an adolescent counsellor, basically. So the staggering number of young people I was seeing who were presenting with neurodivergent traits. And when I was looking at my caseload, it was often over 50%. And I think I have a little bit of a radar for it because I've worked with it before. But I really started to worry about maybe counsellors that didn't have a radar or weren't too aware, and how they would work with young people presenting with neurodivergent traits, and adults and students, actually. So yeah, it's usually about 50 or over % of clients I'm seeing who are presenting with neurodivergent traits. Some are diagnosed and some aren't.
I think that's really telling. And do you think that the recognition of seeing neurodivergent clients is because you've done training, so you're more aware of them, or there's a general increase? I guess it's a chicken and egg question, really. Are there now more? And I guess there's a question to be asked somewhere. Why would that be? Or is it that we're more attuned to picking up neurodivergent cues?
Yes, now that's, as you say, that is a chicken and egg one, isn't it? And it is difficult. I think people are far more attuned to neurodivergence. It's a new word. I wouldn't have known what it meant a number of years ago, you know. So I think we are more attuned. I also think that in stressful situations such as schools, young people who are neurodivergent, who maybe are a little bit different, who don't fit in quite as easily as other young people, then can go on to develop mental health conditions. So that's why they tend to, you tend to see a high percentage of them in schools, universities, and college. So whether or not, I don't know the answer, Rory. I don't know whether or not there are more neurodivergent people coming through, or if we're just better at recognizing them now. And as I say, I think my radar's been a little bit sort of turned on with this because of the work I've done previously. And you know what? I remember when I first started on this subject, I'd talk about it and it's, oh, Sian's on about neurodivergence again. And yet now I've been proved right. You know, it is something that needs to be, I think, included in primary training. It is something that counsellors really need to be aware of. And as you and I know, there's very little in the way of really robust training out there for people trying to learn about this. I devoured everything I could. I've done as much as I possibly can, and I still am, to get myself in a position where I can really best support my clients.
Well, I mean, I think it's a wonderful commitment to continual professional development, and it speaks to it answers a question that I get asked all the time: what CPD should I do? And I always say your clients will tell you what CPD you should be doing, because it'll be when you're in supervision you're sure, I'm not sure about this. There's where the CPD is. Yes, and I would agree with you. You know, first trainings you know, are based in, you know, 1950s, 1960s meta models of therapy. And a lot of what we know now about the human condition, we're now finding out in, you know, the late 20th, early 21st century. And we need to adapt our therapeutic approach to that. So that brings me to my next question. How do you adapt your therapeutic approach to someone who's neurodivergent?
Well, I think the first thing, Rory, is well, there's two things really. If someone comes with a diagnosis, or autism or neurodivergence is on the radar, they come in and they might say, oh, I'm struggling with this and I think it might be this, or my friend has this and I think I might be similar, then that makes that whole conversation much easier. If that isn't the case, then sort of as I go through my assessment, I have questions such as, do you have any sensory issues with lights, or, you know, with smells or with noises? What's your eating like? What's your food like? What's your friendship group like? How do you fit in with your friends? So I really try and start to build a good picture of my client's needs. If they have sensory issues, then I will say to them, okay, what's going on in this room? Are you all right? Are you comfortable in this room? Usually people are. The only thing I've really had to do is make sure I don't have a strong cup of coffee before they come in, because they don't like the smell of coffee, some neurodivergent people. And also I sometimes have to take my clock off the wall and put it in a drawer with a big thick cushion over the top of it.
Yes.
I always ask, are you comfortable? What do you need? Get your water bottle out, you know, and just try and put clients at their ease. And so that is my first sensory adaptation. And if clients have sensory issues, we might look at ways that they can have like a sensory toolbox that can help them navigate the school or university day. So maybe they have ear loops or earbuds, you know, maybe they wear dark glasses for the lights. Maybe they might have like a nice hanky with a bit of lavender smell on it if certain smells bother them. And what I find particularly in education establishments is that you have to listen to your client, find out where they struggle, and then go back to the school and advocate for them. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's about, I need time out so I can just go and sit somewhere quiet. I need not to be in the busy corridors. I need to be able to get to lunch earlier so I can have this particular sandwich before it all sells out. So it's really looking at what works for them in the education establishment. And quite often what I've found is then we kind of have to step out of traditional counselling roles and become much more of an advocate for our young people. So it's quite different how we have to adapt. There's issues of confidentiality there, of course. So you just have to check that your students or your clients are happy for you to have those conversations. And then you have to try and get staff to step out of their frame of reference and really understand and make those adaptations. Now, an interesting example I'll give you is sometimes clients will report to me they're being bullied, and they're not, but they feel it. They can feel it in the back of their head. And staff will come to me and go, yeah, but he's not being bullied. And I'll say, well, it's his perception and we have to work with that. So there's something about believing, really believing your client, because so many times neurodivergent clients come and they say, I've been talking about this and no one believes me. We have to believe them. So there's sensory adaptations, there's adaptations in school, there's those sort of things. Then this quite often what I found is that young people will really struggle with friendships or in groups, and they try very, very hard to fit in, and sometimes they really struggle with this. So I try and explain to my neurodivergent clients that actually, if people have an explanation why, that can really help. You don't need to use the autism word or the neurodivergent word. You can just sort of say, I'm the sort of people that really struggles in large groups, so I'm going to sit by myself in the library at lunchtime. I'm the sort of person that really doesn't want to go out clubbing. You guys go out and have a really nice time, and I'll catch you later. So I'm the sort of person who is a really good strategy for clients to use to help other people understand.
I think what you've outlined here is, and what's coming to my awareness is that the intake is really, really important. And the intake questionnaire gives a really good picture of the client, but also the advocacy piece. So, as a former school counsellor, yes, sometimes you have to very patiently explain to our teaching colleagues that although the student may be disruptive, all behaviour is goal directed. And if you could explain, that's how I used to explain it. All behaviour is goal directed, and once you understand the goal, then you can address the behaviour. You cannot address the behaviour without knowing the goal of it. So I would explain that, and I'd also say that you could there were some a lot of the colleagues I work with, teaching colleagues. I'm a teacher myself, so I've taught. A lot of them may had a very traditional, shall we say, view of child behaviour, and sometimes as a therapist, I had to take them to one side and say, I really get it. I really understand. It's not an easy gig teaching. However, your life could be made a lot easier if you just work with this person and help them on their way. And what I really like is the teaching of a vocabulary that doesn't out a neurodivergent person. I'm not the sort of person who, and allows them to just express their choices in a way that makes them okay and is very clear to others, very clear communication to others. What I wanted to ask you is do you talk about eye contact at all? Because I know some neurodivergent people don't like eye contact, do they?
Yes, I do, Rory. And so what I sometimes say to my clients, I'll say, would you prefer if I sit in an angle and I've got a nice picture that I look at, or I sometimes look down? And so I always check that out as well. So, I'm fine with it actually, but some aren't. And I'm getting quite good now at sort of looking. I put my chair at an angle actually.
Yes.
That's what I do, and work side by side. That can help as well.
Yeah, I heard a wonderful story about someone who worked for NASA, And they both shared the same room, and one was neurodivergent and the other wasn't. And one person would ask a question, and the neurodivergent person would answer in an email. and they worked well. They were high level techs, on the space program, and it worked well. They sat back to back, so they didn't have to look at each other and ask a question, and the email would come through. And I think that's the sort of adaptation that neurodivergent people need. You need to play to their strengths and work with them, And it's just struck me, going back to what you said earlier about their frame of reference. That is very client-centered, isn't it? Although someone might have something in their mind, you acknowledge it. And Rogers very famously said that, our experience is infallible. And then he goes on to say, therefore, it needs to be checked in new and primary ways. And I guess part of the therapy would be to maybe help them understand that this is a process that is specific to them, and reality check, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. You really, I know we do it with all our clients, but you really have to build a thorough picture of your client, and then find out what they want to change. Because what can you really help them with? I don't mean change as in, change themselves. I mean, but what can make their life easier for them?
Yeah.
And just going back to what you were saying earlier, that training. I've put together some training that I've delivered in one of the schools I work in, and I'm hopefully going to do it in another. And I really think if people understand, they are just so much more tolerant. But where I see it really quite differently is in gender differences as well. Girls with ADHD getting excluded, placed in, not detentions or whatever. Whereas quite often the young males, they're given a little bit more leeway because they've got ADHD. But so have some of the girls, but they're not diagnosed. And I think it's really important to try and look at that and ensure that we have some sort of equanimity there, because in terms of sort of diagnosis for things like ADHD, I think it's one girl to every 4 boys. We have to be very aware of everything like this.
Yes, and as we know, women mask more effectively than men do. So things like special interests in autism, where someone might have some may uncharitably call it an obsession, but a special interest is where someone is just really interested in something and it takes all their energy. With girls, and I read recently in a book, I'm quoting from a book here, so I'm being very thoughtful, is that it could be makeup and clothes. Now that would be considered. He puts his quote mark hands up, you can't see, girly. It wouldn't be considered neurodivergent. However, it could be a neurodivergent term. So I think that I'm getting lots of ideas as I'm speaking to you. My neurons are triggering off. I think that if I was a school counsellor now, I might go down the route that you're suggesting, which is, of course, doing some psychoeducation with the teachers, joining the dots, squaring the circle. Yeah.
It just makes for a much better school environment, and it helps the young people. And it is just the right thing. We should be kind, and we should be helping everybody. And, it's really interesting what you were saying about masking. I see that so much. And masking can be really useful. We all do it. If I have to go to Uncle John's birthday party and I really don't want to go, I'll put a smile on my face and go and present an image of my best self. And I'll get home and I'll go, oh, I'm pleased that's over. So masking can be very useful. But if we rely on it too much, it leads to burnout. Yeah. And I have girls that come to see me, and they try so hard during the day. They do so well. You would have no idea there was anything going on with them. They get home and they just stare at a wall.
Yeah.
Or they might need to dance to burn that energy off, or they might need to cry. They just have to then somehow regulate themselves. You know, especially if they normally use stimming to help them regulate, and they haven't been able to do that during the day because people would have gone, oh, you know, that's why are you flapping your hands? Why are you doing this? They've had to sort of hold all that in. Then they need to be able to get home and unmask and regulate themselves. But too much masking leads to autistic burnout, which is a really big problem, particularly with girls. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that one of the other positive aspects of being, you know, of doing all this CPD is you instantly become more employable. If you could go to a school and you talk about school counselling, you say not only that, I can teach your staff about how to work with autistic or neurodivergent young people. It will almost certainly contribute to less exclusions, less people put in isolation, less disruption. You know, we can develop a whole school approach. I think what school wouldn't bite your hand off for that? What school wouldn't say, brilliant, we've got a counselling professional in who can help us with a lot of the areas that maybe our colleagues struggle with because they haven't got the relevant training, you know. So it sounds like brilliant work we do. I'm going to say I think the school is very lucky to have you, Sian.
Thank you. Well, schools are just so very busy and so, I won't go on, and underfunded and just and everything. It's really it is really difficult. But I'm hoping that this topic is a hot topic now. You know, it's been there forever, but I've been banging on about it forever. But it is now. People are beginning to see that, and I hope so. And I just want to pick up on something you said about special interest, because it goes back to how we can adapt our work a little bit. So quite often, if somebody is really struggling to regulate, a special interest is the best way to help them regulate. And sometimes if I'm with a young person in a counselling session, and I can see that there's maybe some trauma there and they're getting a bit unregulated, we will then switch to talking about their special interest. You know, and that can be baking, it can be Lego, it can be wildlife, you know, it can be anything. You find out that in your assessment session. And it might be that, you know, they bring pictures in of their favourite things that they can look at to help bring them down.
Yes.
So special interests is so important, as is encouraging our students, our young people, our adults as well, to find their tribes.
Yes.
You know, because resources out there are so stretched, and it's going to be more and more difficult. It's practically impossible to get an assessment, you know, in some areas now. People are going to have to self-diagnose more. And if you're with other people that are like you and been through the same struggles, it's incredibly affirming. And that can be really difficult for young people, which is sometimes why you need to get, you know, their parents involved in that whole process as well. Because there's nothing. What I found is that young people who have an autism or neurodivergent diagnosis earlier, and they're in a positive environment, that's fine. They're fine with it. They embrace it. Yeah, I can sing in perfect pitch because I'm autistic. I can do this because I'm autistic. Great. Those, by the time it gets to adolescence, when they're desperately trying to fit in, the absolute last blooming thing they want is an autism assessment. Because it might help them understand, but it makes them feel different. The worst possible thing for an adolescent is feeling different.
Well, I think on those, prophetic and wise words, Sian Clare, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Sian Clare. Thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions and bringing us the information from the experts in the field. And exciting news, I guess, as here you and I, Rory, within Counselling Tutor, together with our academic team, are in the process of building out a training course on neurodivergence. And Sian is very gladly and capably kind of helping us out with that and directing the way that training will go. So if you're interested in that training, keep your eyes peeled. We'll mention it on the podcast. And of course, if you're on our newsletter, we will mail out when that neurodivergent training for counsellors comes available. But that is Practice Matters for today. We now move on to Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counselingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your Counselling Tutor discount. That's counselingskillsacademy.com. Student Services is where we recognise you, the student, the all-important, the future of counselling and psychotherapy. You're there now on your student journey, and we recognise that journey is not always smooth and easy. It can be really rewarding, but it can be tricky at times. And it seems, Rory, as I look at today's topic, AI transcribing your skills sessions, that it just gets trickier and trickier. You know, I think when I was back and we were doing our skills sessions, you'd have it was a tape recorder. I remember a tape. Remember those, Rory? The old cassette tapes? You'd put it in and you'd record it. And then the only way to transcribe that was you would listen to it and you would hand write it out what you were hearing. But of course, technology has changed all that. But in making things easier, it sometimes makes things a little more tricky. And it's sometimes easy to see how it helps, but maybe not see so clearly where it might trip us up, Rory.
Yes, indeed. And this is a topic that comes up time and time again in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, type in Counselling Tutor to Facebook. You'll find there's a closed group will pop in and you'll see loads and loads of conversations. It's well worth joining. And yes, you're absolutely right. When we were novice therapists, I can actually remember someone saying to me, this internet business, what's this internet? Yep, guy, that's how old I am. That's how old I am. And recently, there's been a plethora of websites that offer transcription services, that offer ability to be able to put a recording into it, and it will transcribe it for you. And of course, we have ChatGPT. Whatever instance it is now. At the moment, I think it's 4+. The difficulty with using AI to transcribe anything, any confidential information, is that we really don't know where that information is being stored or what it's being used for. And if you sign up to a website, or certainly one that's free, and be aware of anything that's free on the internet, because there's an old saying, if it's free, you're the product. In other words, you know, there's a price to be paid for everything, and it's just when and how much you pay. And usually it's data. You know, a lot of these websites want data. Data is a big business. In fact, data now is a bigger business than oil. Data brokerage is a huge international transglobal business. And effectively they're selling you. And if you transcribe a skill session with a client, they'll be selling your client's information as well. So be very, very thoughtful about how you transcribe a skills session. And it is a little bit of a nightmare. And I think I'd extend that to be very thoughtful about what you record your skills session on. You shouldn't be using a mobile phone to record a skills session. A, because it might ring. That's no good at all. And B, because once it's onto a device, it's connected to the internet and no one quite knows how these things speak to each other. So be very, very wary about using any kind of AI system to transcribe your skills session. I seem to be a bit of a doomsday conspiracy theorist in this, Ken.
Yeah, tinfoil hats on, as they say. And I guess we have these conversations because we really care. We care about client confidentiality. We care about you as a student listening to this. It's important. And, you know, that relationship we have with a client, it's a relationship where we start off by building trust, by offering a threat-free environment where that client trusts enough, often to tell us things they've never told another living human being. That is a very privileged position to be in. what happens with the data that they give us is really, really important. That information that they give us, we wouldn't go and start telling people or broadcasting it out or giving it to a company. And we may inadvertently be doing that if we're using these tools. Now, we said AI transcription of skills sessions, and you may look at the tool for transcribing skills sessions and go, well, it doesn't say AI. But it's worth having a look at their privacy policy, have a look where what data is captured, how that data is stored, who has access to that data. Because if you're putting in a transcription, if you're putting in a skills session, you're giving it all. You're giving everything that client has said, every word they said, and every word you replied back. And what's happening with that data? You need to be really sure that it's not being stored, looked at, gone through, and that there is no way that it can come back at any stage in the future and harm that client or harm you and your practice. And that's all we're saying. We don't want to cause fear. We just want to say, look carefully and consider carefully before using these tools. And we say this a lot, not just with transcriptions, with any tool you use within your counselling practice. Be sure of what you are using. You, Rory, mentioned the free, anything that is free, usually you're clicking a button somewhere along the line to say, yes, I'm going to use these free services. You can have my data in return. It doesn't say it like that because they have very smart lawyers who write these things. Yes. But it's really, really worth having a look at. So, Rory, how might somebody make a considered decision if, say, for instance, using a tool? Let's say I've got my skills session and I'm looking at a tool to do that transcription to save myself pretty much hours of work. Where would I look if I looked at a tool to find out what's really going on?
Well, you've teed that up nicely for me, Ken. Thank you. Yes, you go onto the website and you look in the privacy policy, and you'd have a look at the privacy policy. And what you're really looking for is if the website is signed up to general data protection regulations. Now, a lot of these websites, I have to say, are American. You know, a lot of big tech is based in America, where GDPR really isn't the law that covers their data protection issues. But what I can tell you is that lots of American websites do have a data protection statement. Have a look at that data protection statement, and I go farther than that. I would actually try and either download it or copy and paste it and just put it with your records, so you have some form of defensible decision if anything comes back. But it does live in the privacy policy. And as Ken and myself often say to each other, if a website doesn't have a privacy policy, a written privacy policy, maybe best just sliding by that website and finding one that does, because having a privacy policy is a statement of intent. It means that the company has sat down at some point and said, we need to really think about how clients' data is being held, processed, and eventually, I guess, destroyed, because you can only keep data for so long. If a website doesn't have a privacy policy, or there's no reference to general data protection regulations, certainly if you're in the UK or Europe, then I would respectfully suggest that maybe you may want to wander off and find another one, Ken.
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting, if you're based in the United Kingdom or the EU, or the company is based in the United Kingdom or the EU, the European Union, then having a privacy policy on the website is legislated. It is a legal requirement. If any data is being collected, held, stored, processed, retrieved, and even if that's just a telephone number and a name, it doesn't matter what that data is, a privacy policy is required. So if you're working with a company that has a privacy policy, if they are based in the United Kingdom or the EU, they should have a link to who they report to. This we certainly do here in Counselling Tutor. It's the ICO. We have a data protection officer, a DPO. And who would that be, Rory?
That'd be me, Ken.
It'll be you. That's how you can speak with such authority on these topics. You are our data protection officer. And Rory's duty is to make sure that we are compliant. And Rory is often on the telephone to the ICO checking. And if he doesn't know, he'll ask. He'll phone up and say, "Excuse me," because we pay a fee. We pay a fee to be registered with the ICO, and they offer a service. And that's part of that service is kind of giving guidance. So if you find that those flags and I'm talking good flags now on a website, they've got a privacy policy. That's a good green flag. They don't have a privacy policy, big red flag. Green flag. If they're registered with the ICO, that's another tick in the box. If they tell you how the data is stored and protected, that's another tick. But even so, Rory, I would be reluctant to take a client's data and pop it into any business. I really would. I think if I had to transcribe stuff now, I think I'd be doing it with headphones in and just taking the hour and a half or the 2 hours it takes to protect the client.
I would. Think about it like this. Many years ago, if you went transcription, you go to someone who was a transcriber, human being.
Yes.
Usually someone who was someone like my late mother, who was a very, very fast typer. You could speak and she could type as fast as you could speak. And you would go and you would kind of get a sense from that person if you could trust them. And some transcribers, they use them in the legal system.
Yes.
They are regulated and they have to sign non-disclosure agreements and all that kind of thing. So think about it like that. But I do think that you might have to do the hard miles and just play it back and then just write a bit and play it back and write a bit. And I will end this kind of topic on, there's already been complaints to ethical bodies from clients who has found out that their personal details have been put into an AI bot, and this is a growing edge of ethical complaints. I'm not saying that everybody who's had their information put into an AI makes a complaint, but there are areas of complaints, and and a lot of ethical bodies or professional bodies are growing policies around ethical use of AI in practice. So very new and a developing edge. One to keep an eye out for, I think, Ken.
Yeah. And remember, you heard it first here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We try to look down the road at what is coming. And you speak about those AI policies, Rory. They're certainly on their way. And there is going to come a day when our ethical framework includes AI and how we use that or don't use that and what we look out for in service of our clients and ourselves and protection of ourselves and our practice. It's an ever-changing world, which I think keys beautifully into that very first topic we said, when do you change your supervisor? Things are changing all the time. It's about being current in our practice, looking what's happening. And we're glad you joined us today for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. This has been episode number 291.
It has, and we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, changing supervisors, navigating the when and the why. And Ken and myself had an interesting discussion and a little wander down the road of why and when should you change your supervisor. On to Practice Matters, a fantastic interview with Sian Clare, a real professional in a real developing edge of practice, counselling neurodivergent children. And we finished with Student Services, AI and Transcribing Your Skills session. Now, before we close out today's episode, I've got a couple of quick favours to ask you, the listener. If you've enjoyed and benefited from our conversation today, please leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you're tuning in from. It generally helps us reach more ears and grow our community. And if someone in your professional circle might benefit from our discussions, share this episode on your social media platforms. I think that word of mouth is so powerful, and we appreciate every share, tweet, or is it X now? Post X tweet that brings new listeners into our community. And really thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey through your practice life. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource.
Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.